Hello, this is Paddy, aka Rikimaru EX plus Alpha, and today I'm going to take you through a tutorial of Flash, some of the major program features and some of the fundamentals. I've tried to break everything down into sections, so I'll try and keep everything concise and understandable. The first thing we're going to go through is all the various tools and panel settings. It's your major starting point before you can get started drawing your characters, etc. Okay, to start out, if you open a new document on Flash, you'll see a number of windows or panels or panes, whatever you want to call them. Some features differ between versions, but you should see on the left, just here, your Tools panel. In the center, your main work area, which also has your timeline, which shows your scenes, your keyframes, etc. On the right, you've got your color mixer. And then you've got your library here, which stores all your different symbols and sounds, etc. You've got your Align, Info and Transform panel at the bottom right. Your properties below everything. And that just about covers it. You need to be able to draw and use all these tools before you can actually start animating. It's basically like being able to walk before you can run. So I always start out by configuring my document and publish settings. For instance, if you animated your whole movie and you wanted it to be faster once you finished, you'd have to change the frame rate, and this would affect how the sounds are synchronized, etc. So it's always best to figure out what these settings are going to be before you actually get started. You'll see on your properties that you've got some of these settings here, such as the size of your project, your publish settings, etc., your background color, all that stuff. But if you click the Modify tab at the top and click Document, these are your preliminary settings. So you've got the title of your project, a description, that's just like the file details. Your dimensions, which by default are 550 pixels by 400 pixels on the height. I find this is a good size to use, so you might not want to screw around with that. If your project is too big, then some computers won't be able to display it, and it might slow everything down, so I just keep it small if you can. Your background color, tend to keep that white just so you can see anything you draw on top of it. And bear in mind that you can always insert a new layer for a background. Now your frame rate is very important. You tend to see most things in real life at 24 frames per second. That's how the eye captures images. But for the purposes of starting out, I'd recommend staying at 12 frames per second, which is the default. It basically means for 10 seconds of animation, you'd need 120 frames. So at 24 you need twice as much, so there's a bit more work involved, but it'll play all the images a lot faster at 24. I've only just started working at 24 frames per second. It adds to the realism, but for starting out, just keep it at 12. Right, next you need to set up your publish settings, and this is basically to do with how you export your movie. So File, Publish Settings, and by default you should have the formats on this tab, Flash and HTML. You really don't need the HTML, it basically opens the Flash file in your Internet Explorer or Safari or Firefox, whatever you're using. But if you've got Flash, then obviously you can run the Shockwave Flash, so you don't really need to worry about that. Okay, so if you configure the Flash tab, first you can choose your version, and anything post Flash Player 6 will have these extra compression and optimization options. You can also protect it from import, etc., to stop people from stealing your work. The JPEG quality, this is, suppose you're using pixels or you're doing a pixel movie, then you can set the quality here. And then here you've got audio stream and audio event, and these are quite important to me. I always tend to set the bit rate to 48 kbps because that basically allows you to convert from mono to stereo. And if you have stereo sound, then you can play around with the left-right divide and do various effects on your audio. I'd leave the quality on fast and the compression on MP3 because it'll just keep the size of your project down. So once you've set everything up, click OK, and then this is your main work area where you can draw everything. It's quite a crude drawing really, isn't it? Okay, so we'll start going through the tools next. Now the Tools panel reads Tools at the top, View for navigating, Colours and Options. And whenever you select a specific tool, you often get extra options here and sometimes more options on your Properties panel at the bottom. You can actually calibrate the sensitivity of different aspects of how, for instance, how many times you can undo stuff and the sensitivity of your line drawing and stuff like that on your Flash Professional preferences. But I tend to keep things default, so if we get to any point where I can explain extra features, I'll mention that. Right, the first tools are the black selection arrow and the white subselection arrow, and these are basically for selecting different parts of your drawing. You probably won't need the white arrow. I'll just show you what that does. If I select this area here, you can see you get different anchor points wherever there's a change between a different line or a different curve. And you break all your drawings up into lines or strokes and fills or paint fills. And these different recs basically mean that you can adjust different anchor points, the rotation or how it spreads across the stage. But you can do the same with the black arrow. I tend to use the selection tool because then you can just click a specific point or stretch out a point. And if you click, you can select a specific line, or you can hold shift to select more than one line. And you can also double click to select all of one colour of a line or fill. Note, when I move the cursor over specific points, I get the option to either curve the line or move it on the X and Y axis. Another selection tool you can use is the lasso tool. It's kind of like the tool you get on Adobe Photoshop. You basically drag your mouse around all the objects that you want to select. And then where you close the object, anything within that lasso radius gets selected. You can click anywhere on the work area to deselect, and you can also use the lasso tool with a different option. If you look on the options on your tools, you've got polygon mode, which basically means you can click to start one point, click again for the next one, and continue, and then double click when you want to close the selection rect. You can then hit backspace or delete if you want to delete selected lines. If you want to select everything, you can either choose to click everything within the keyframe, or just press Control and A or Apple and A. There's also another way of selecting things. If you use the free transform tool, which is just below the black arrow, and drag what you want to select or click on it, it basically gives you this bounds box on the perimeter, which basically allows you to make things wider or taller or transform them on each of the X and Y. And if you move your mouse beyond the actual corner, you can see you get the curved arrow, which basically allows you to rotate. And that rotates on the center of rotation, which is marked by this little white circle here. So if I was to move that around, I could rotate from a different center of rotation. can use Control and Z or Apple and Z to go backwards. In the actual, it's basically like time traveling, so you can resolve all the mistakes you've made. I sometimes wish I had that feature in real life. Clean up my mistakes. You've also got the option with the free transform tool. If you move off the horizontal or vertical point, you can see that changing just there. That's for skewing. But when you've actually selected something with this free transform tool, you'll see on the options, you get all these different options such as rotate and skew, scale, which is like a global scale on both the X and the Y, kind of like constraining an object. And then you also get distort and envelope, which will show you all the different anchor points, and then you can just modify them however you wish. Right, before we move on, I'll just explain the view area. Using the hand tool, you can move around on your stage wherever it's zoomed in. You can use the magnifying glass to zoom in or out, or you can have a specific type of view. So if I click view, magnification and show frame, then it will fit all of the work area to my specific size. And you can arrange all these panels just to suit your need. I'm trying to use a small setup here just to film the video. Below view you've got your colours, so you can set the colour of your lines and the colour of your fills. This is an example of a fill, this yellow area just here. And you can choose these from a default setup of palettes. I think we call these swatches, or you could select somewhere off your work area, such as this blue area here, to try and match that colour to a default palette of colours. If you also note on your colour mixer, in regards to these solid colours that I've been selecting, you can move up and down on the darkness scale slider here. You can use the RGB sliders if you're familiar with them from Photoshop. And you can also set how transparent the colour is on your alpha. And all these colours have a different reference point. I think black, for instance, is 0000001. Right, the next tool. The line tool here, this is for drawing straight lines. You'll see on your preferences you can define the type of line, such as dotted lines or solid or hairline. By default your lines will be solid, but I tend to use hairline because they're a bit more accurate. They're actually 0.5 on the thickness instead of 1, which is a solid line, and I'll just show you the difference between those lines, because I tend to think that the solid line looks a bit clumsy. You can see in comparison just how thick that is. But the hairline, suppose you were to zoom in or make an object bigger, then it would still look the same from far away as it does close up, if you know what I mean. You can also use the pencil tool to draw lines, and on the options on the toolbar you can define the type of lines that are drawn. Straighten, for instance, if I was to try and draw a circle here, because it's set on straighten, it makes it a perfect circle. Or if I did a rounded square, you can see how it tries to match it to specific mathematical shapes, such as rectangles, triangles, etc.